The morning sun gleamed through the tall windows of JFK Airport as travelers rushed about, dragging suitcases and checking flight times. Among them walked Robert Kensington, his polished leather shoes clicking against the shiny floor. At 58 years old, Robert had the confident stride of someone who was used to getting his way. His custom-tailored suit probably cost more than what most people earned in a month. He checked his gold watch, a habit he'd developed over years of important meetings where time meant money. Robert wasn't just flying today, he was flying first class, as he always did. Economy was for other people, people who hadn't worked their way up to become one of New York's top investment bankers. He bypassed the long security lines through the priority lane, barely acknowledging the staff who checked his boarding pass with practiced smiles. "Good morning, Mr. Kensington," said the flight attendant at the gate, recognizing him as a frequent flyer. "We're beginning boarding for first-class passengers now." Robert nodded and walked down the jet bridge, already thinking about the deals he would close once he reached San Francisco. The cabin crew greeted him warmly as he stepped onto the plane, and he headed straight for his seat, 2B, an aisle seat in the second row of first class. That's when he saw him. A young black man was already sitting in seat 2A by the window. He wore plain jeans, a simple t-shirt, and what looked like ordinary sneakers. His focus was deep in some kind of scientific journal, and he had a worn backpack tucked neatly under the seat in front of him. Robert froze for a moment. This wasn't what he expected. First class was usually filled with people like him, business executives in suits who spoke the silent language of wealth and privilege. Not young men in casual clothes who looked like they belonged in the back of the plane. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice carrying a hint of stiffness as he took his seat. The young man looked up and gave a friendly nod before returning to his reading. Robert settled in, placing his briefcase in the overhead compartment and arranging his belongings with precise movements. He couldn't help glancing sideways at his seat neighbor, who seemed completely at ease in the luxury cabin. "First time in first class?" Robert finally asked, the question carrying a subtle edge. The young man looked up. "No, sir," he replied politely with a warm smile. "I fly this route pretty regularly." There was something about his calm confidence that irritated Robert even more. He was used to people being impressed by him, not the other way around. As other passengers filed past them toward economy, Robert noticed several flight attendants greeting his seatmate with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Good to see you again," one of them said. The flight attendant approached with pre-flight drinks. "What can I get for you, gentlemen?" "Champagne," Robert said curtly. "Just water for me, thanks, Diane," the young man replied. The flight attendant smiled at him like they were old friends. "How's the research going, Dr. Lawson?" she asked. "Dr. Lawson." Robert's eyebrows shot up slightly. This couldn't be right. The young man didn't look like any doctor he knew. His doctors played golf at the same country club he did, wore Rolex watches, and certainly didn't dress like college students. "Coming along well," Dr. Lawson replied, hoping to finish the paper on the flight. Robert sipped his champagne, studying his seatmate with new curiosity. Maybe the guy was a graduate student or some kind of research assistant. Surely he couldn't be an actual physician. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Robert couldn't shake his discomfort. He pulled out his phone to make one last important call, speaking loudly about figures in the millions, subtly making sure his seatmate could hear his importance. The young man remained absorbed in his journal, unimpressed. And somehow, that made Robert even more determined to put him in his place before this flight was over. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and Robert Kensington was already feeling irritated. He glanced again at Dr. Lawson, who continued reading his medical journal peacefully. There was something about the young man's calm demeanor that rubbed Robert the wrong way. In Robert's world, first class was a status symbol, not just a more comfortable seat. As the final passengers boarded, Robert cleared his throat loudly. When that didn't get the attention of a passing flight attendant, he pressed the call button. A flight attendant named Diane appeared with a professional smile. "How can I help you, sir?" Robert straightened his expensive tie and spoke loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I think there might be some confusion with the seating arrangement." He gestured toward Dr. Lawson without looking at him. "I'm not sure if this gentleman is in the correct section." Dr. Lawson finally looked up from his journal, his expression calm but his eyes reflecting a familiar wariness. as if he'd been through this before. Diane's smile tightened slightly. "Let me check both your boarding passes, sir." "That won't be necessary," Robert said with a dismissive wave. "I'm a Platinum member. I fly this route twice a month. I just want to make sure everyone is where they're supposed to be." Dr. Lawson silently handed his boarding pass to Diane. Robert reluctantly did the same. After checking both passes, Diane handed them back. "Everything is in order, gentlemen. You're both in your assigned seats." She gave Dr. Lawson a look of quiet apology before moving on. Robert wasn't satisfied. "I paid over $5,000 for this seat," he muttered, just loud enough for those around him to hear. "First class isn't for everyone, you know." An older woman across the aisle shot Robert a disapproving look. A businessman in front turned around briefly before shaking his head and facing forward again. Dr. Lawson took a deep breath and closed his journal. "Sir," he said quietly, "I understand you might be having a rough day, but we're going to be sitting next to each other for the next 6 hours. Maybe we could start over." Robert scoffed. "I'm not having a rough day. I just expect certain standards when I pay for first class." "And what standards do you feel aren't being met?" Dr. Lawson asked, his voice remaining level. Robert hesitated, suddenly aware that several passengers were watching the exchange. "Never mind," he said finally. "Just keep to yourself, and we'll be fine." The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Robert pulled out his laptop and began typing aggressively, making a show of his important work. Dr. Lawson returned to his journal, occasionally making notes in the margins with a simple ballpoint pen. No fancy fountain pen or leather notebook like Robert would have expected from a real doctor. When the flight attendants came around with hot towels, Robert took his with barely a thank you. Dr. Lawson thanked Diane by name and asked about her daughter's college applications. "She got into UCLA and Northwestern," Diane beamed. "Still waiting to hear from a few more." "That's wonderful," Dr. Lawson replied. "She's a bright kid. Tell her congratulations from me." This familiar exchange only deepened Robert's suspicions. The guy was clearly trying too hard, acting like he belonged when he obviously didn't. As the plane reached cruising altitude, drink service began. Robert ordered a top-shelf scotch, making sure to specify the brand. Dr. Lawson asked for cranberry juice. "Just juice?" Robert couldn't help commenting. "The alcohol is complimentary in first class, you know." "I know," Dr. Lawson replied. "I have a long day ahead when we land." Robert smirked. "Big plans in San Francisco." "You could say that," Dr. Lawson answered simply, not taking the bait. Robert downed his scotch and signaled for another. He was determined to enjoy his flight despite his unfortunate seating arrangement, and somewhere deep down, he was becoming increasingly curious about who this young man really was and why everyone on the plane staff seemed to know him except Robert. The meal service began about an hour into the flight. Robert had already finished his second scotch and was feeling the warm buzz of alcohol in his system. He watched as the flight attendants prepared the cabin, laying white cloths on the tray tables in first class. "Today we're serving either grilled salmon with asparagus or beef tenderloin with roasted potatoes," announced Diane as she reached their row. "I'll have the beef rare," Robert said without looking up from his phone. "And for you, Dr. Lawson?" Diane asked. "The salmon sounds great, thank you," Dr. Lawson replied. Robert couldn't help himself. "Doctor, huh? What kind of doctor are you exactly? You seem pretty young." His tone carried a clear hint of doubt. Dr. Lawson turned toward Robert with a patient expression. "I'm a neurosurgeon." Robert nearly choked on his drink. "A brain surgeon? Really?" He looked Dr. Lawson up and down, taking in his casual clothes and unassuming presence. "Aren't brain surgeons usually older?" "I finished medical school early," Dr. Lawson said simply. Robert wasn't convinced. "And what hospital do you work at?" "Somewhere in San Francisco." "I split my time between Memorial Hospital in New York and a few others. I travel quite a bit for work." Memorial was one of the top hospitals in the country. Robert knew this because his own father had received treatment there years ago. Still skeptical, he pressed further. "Memorial, huh? Big place. Who's the chief of neurosurgery there?" Without missing a beat, Dr. Lawson answered, Dr. Wilson Thompson. He's been chief for about 8 years now. Brilliant surgeon. Robert frowned. The young man certainly talked the talk, but still something didn't add up. Their meals arrived, and Robert immediately found something to complain about. "This doesn't look rare," he told Diane, pointing at his beef, "and the potatoes are barely warm." "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me take that back and get you a new plate," Diane offered. "Don't bother," Robert said with a dramatic sigh. "I'll make do, but I might mention this in my survey." He cut into his beef with unnecessary force, glancing sideways to see if Dr. Lawson was witnessing his display of influence. But Dr. Lawson was focused on his own meal, eating quietly and occasionally making notes in his journal. Robert noticed that the journal had complex diagrams that looked like brain scans or surgical procedures. "Big case?" Robert asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Dr. Lawson nodded. "I'm giving a presentation on a new surgical technique tomorrow. Just reviewing my notes." "In San Francisco?" "Yes, at the International Neuroscience Conference. I'm one of the keynote speakers." Robert's eyebrows rose despite himself. If this guy was telling the truth, he was a bigger deal than Robert had initially thought. But then again, anyone could claim to be anything on a plane. It's not like Robert could verify it. As if reading his thoughts, the businessman in front of them turned around. "Excuse me, but are you Dr. Lawson? The one who pioneered that new approach to brain tumor removal?" Dr. Lawson smiled modestly. "Yes, that's me. My wife's a neurologist at UCSF. She's attending your talk tomorrow. She says your research is groundbreaking." "That's very kind of her to say," Dr. Lawson replied. "Please tell her to come introduce herself after the presentation." The man nodded enthusiastically before turning back around, leaving Robert feeling slightly foolish. He pushed his food around his plate, suddenly less interested in complaining about it. As the flight attendants cleared their trays, Robert noticed several other passengers stealing glances at Dr. Lawson, whispering to each other. Apparently, he wasn't the only one who recognized the doctor. Robert cleared his throat, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Perhaps he had misjudged the situation. But he wasn't about to admit that, not yet anyway. Instead, he pulled out his eye mask and reclined his seat. "I'm going to get some rest," he announced to no one in particular, effectively cutting off any further conversation. But as he pretended to sleep, he couldn't help wondering what else he had gotten wrong about the quiet, unassuming doctor sitting beside him. Robert had been pretending to sleep for nearly an hour. Under his eye mask, his mind raced with thoughts about his seatmate. Could Dr. Lawson really be as important as everyone seemed to think? If so, Robert had made a terrible first impression. Not that it mattered, he told himself. He didn't need to impress some doctor. Just as Robert was considering waking up to get another drink, a commotion erupted several rows ahead. He pushed his eye mask up to see what was happening. An elderly woman was slumped in her seat, her husband frantically trying to get her to respond. "My wife," the man cried out. "Something's wrong with my wife." The flight attendants rushed forward. Diane's voice came over the intercom. "If there's a medical professional on board, we need assistance in first class immediately." Before Diane had even finished speaking, Dr. Lawson was on his feet. "Excuse me," he said to Robert, who had to pull his legs back to let the doctor pass. Robert watched in surprise as Dr. Lawson moved quickly to the elderly couple. "I'm a doctor," he told the panicking husband, his voice calm and authoritative, completely different from the quiet tone he'd used with Robert. "Sir, I need you to step back and give me some room." The flight attendants formed a protective barrier, keeping curious passengers from crowding the area. Robert stood up slightly to get a better view. Dr. Lawson had taken the woman's wrist, checking her pulse while talking to her in a gentle voice. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Can you squeeze my hand if you can hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open, but she seemed confused. Dr. Lawson turned to the flight attendants. "I need the emergency medical kit, please. And oxygen." Diane hurried to retrieve the items while Dr. Lawson continued his assessment. "Sir, does your wife have any medical conditions?" he asked the husband. "She has diabetes and a heart condition," the man replied, his voice shaking. "She takes medication. It's in her purse." Dr. Lawson nodded and asked another flight attendant to find the medication. He turned to the woman again. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Lawson. I'm going to help you. Are you experiencing any chest pain?" The woman managed a weak nod. By now, Diane had returned with the medical kit. Dr. Lawson opened it with practiced ease, quickly finding a stethoscope to listen to the woman's heart and lungs. "Has this happened before?" he asked the husband. "Yes, she had a minor heart attack last year." Dr. Lawson's expression grew more serious. He took out a small device from the kit and placed it on the woman's finger to measure her oxygen levels. After examining the reading, he looked up at Diane. "We need to inform the captain. This woman needs medical attention as soon as possible. I suspect she's having a cardiac event." The captain's voice soon came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Throughout the commotion, Robert watched Dr. Lawson work with increasing amazement. The young doctor moved with confidence, giving clear instructions to the flight attendants and keeping the elderly couple calm. He had administered some medication from the woman's purse, explaining each step to her husband. "This should help stabilize her until we can get her to a hospital," Dr. Lawson said. "I'll stay with her for the landing." A flight attendant asked if anyone would be willing to switch seats so Dr. Lawson could remain with his patient. Without thinking, Robert raised his hand. "I'll move," he said, surprising himself. As Robert gathered his things, Dr. Lawson gave him a quick nod of thanks. For the first time, Robert noticed the intelligence in the doctor's eyes and the steadiness of his hands, hands that apparently performed delicate brain surgeries. Robert settled into his new seat across the aisle, where he could still observe everything. The plane began its descent toward Denver, and the cabin was unusually quiet. Everyone was watching Dr. Lawson as he monitored the woman's vital signs, speaking reassuringly to her and her husband. Robert felt a strange feeling growing inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was respect, mixed with more than a little shame at how he had behaved earlier. The plane landed smoothly in Denver despite the emergency situation. As soon as they reached the gate, paramedics rushed aboard. Dr. Lawson briefed them in quick, precise medical terms, explaining what had happened and what measures he had taken. Blood pressure dropped to 90/60 at one point, he told them. "I administered her nitroglycerin as per her prescription. Oxygen levels stabilized at 94%. The paramedics nodded respectfully, clearly impressed with his handling of the situation. They transferred the elderly woman to a stretcher, her husband following close behind, clutching her purse and looking worried but grateful. As they carried her out, the husband stopped beside Dr. Lawson. "Thank you, doctor. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "You're very welcome. Ask the hospital to send her records to Dr. Michael Lawson at Memorial Hospital. I'd like to follow up on her case." The captain's voice came over the intercom after the paramedics left. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to this medical diversion, there will be a delay while we refuel and file a new flight plan. The crew will provide more information shortly. You may use your electronic devices at this time." People immediately pulled out their phones, many of them googling Dr. Lawson's name. Robert could see the passenger in front of him scrolling through search results. Even from his awkward angle, Robert could make out headlines and images. Dr. Lawson receiving awards, giving speeches at medical conferences, even a cover of a medical journal featuring his work. Whispers spread throughout the cabin. "That's really him. The brain surgery pioneer. He saved that congressman last year. He's giving the keynote at the big conference tomorrow." Robert felt a mixture of emotions washing over him. Embarrassment, shame, regret. He had treated this accomplished doctor like an intruder in his privileged space, all because of what? Because Dr. Lawson was young and black and didn't dress like the doctors Robert knew. After the medical emergency, Dr. Lawson returned to his original seat, which meant Robert should return to his as well. He gathered his things and walked back, feeling the eyes of other passengers on him. Did they all know how rudely he had behaved earlier? "The captain says we'll be back in the air in about 40 minutes, Dr. Lawson said as Robert sat down. "Thank you for letting me know," Robert replied, his voice unnaturally formal. Then, after a pause, "That was impressive, what you did." Dr. Lawson shrugged. "Just doing my job." Not many people could handle an emergency like that with such calm. When you work in a trauma center, you get used to pressure. Dr. Lawson pulled out his phone. Excuse me, I need to send a few messages. I was supposed to attend a dinner tonight in San Francisco, but will be arriving too late now. The neuroscience conference? Robert asked. Dr. Lawson looked up, slightly surprised that Robert had been paying attention earlier. Yes, I'm presenting new surgical techniques tomorrow. An announcement came over the intercom that Wi-Fi service would be complimentary for the remainder of the flight due to the delay. Dr. Lawson thanked the flight attendant who came by to check on him. Dr. Lawson, the flight attendant said, the captain would like to thank you personally when we reach San Francisco. That's really not necessary, Dr. Lawson replied. And several passengers have asked if they can buy you a drink or meal once we're airborne again. Dr. Lawson smiled politely. Please thank them for me, but I'm fine. After the flight attendant left, Robert found himself staring at his hands. The expensive watch on his wrist and the designer cufflinks suddenly seemed like meaningless props, decorations he used to announce his importance to the world. Meanwhile, the man next to him, wearing simple clothes and carrying a worn backpack, had just saved someone's life and declined all praise as if it were just another day at work. Robert realized with a sinking feeling that he had completely misjudged not just Dr. Lawson, but the very nature of worth and importance. And as the crew prepared for takeoff again, he wasn't sure how to make things right. The plane took off from Denver an hour behind schedule. The atmosphere in the cabin had completely changed. Instead of the usual quiet indifference of first-class passengers, there was a sense of shared experience. People kept glancing toward Dr. Lawson with newfound respect. Robert sat stiffly in his seat, pretending to work on his laptop, but actually staring at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes straight. The words he had spoken earlier kept replaying in his mind. First class isn't for everyone. What had he meant by that, really? That first class was only for people who looked like him. Would you gentlemen like anything to drink? Diane asked, stopping at their row. Just water, please, Dr. Lawson replied. The same, Robert said, surprising himself. He usually ordered alcohol on flights. When Diane returned with their waters, she handed Dr. Lawson a note. From the gentleman in 4A, she explained. Dr. Lawson read the note and smiled. Please tell him I'd be happy to talk about the fellowship program after we land. As Diane left, Robert cleared his throat. You must get that a lot. People wanting your advice. Sometimes, Dr. Lawson admitted, though more often by email than on planes. An awkward silence fell between them. Robert took a sip of his water, gathering courage. Look, Dr. Lawson, I think I owe you an apology. Dr. Lawson turned to face him fully for the first time. You don't need to. I do, Robert interrupted. I made assumptions about you. Wrong assumptions. I behaved poorly. Dr. Lawson studied him for a moment. Can I ask you something, Mr. Kensington? Robert, please. And yes. What made you so certain I didn't belong here? Dr. Lawson's tone wasn't accusatory, just genuinely curious. Robert looked down at his hands. I guess I had a certain image in my head of who flies first class. And that image didn't include someone who looks like me. Robert felt his face grow warm. It wasn't just, it was your clothes too. And your age. You're younger than most surgeons. I'm 38, Dr. Lawson said with a slight smile. Not exactly a child prodigy. Robert blinked in surprise. You look younger. I get that a lot. Another silence fell, but it felt less tense now. I built my career on being observant, Robert finally said. On reading people and situations quickly. Making snap judgments about investments, about business partners. I was good at it, or I thought I was. We all have our blind spots, Dr. Lawson offered. Mine seemed bigger than most, Robert admitted. The captain announced they were beginning their final descent into San Francisco. Out the window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Beautiful, Dr. Lawson remarked, looking past Robert at the view. Have you been to San Francisco often? Robert asked, genuinely interested now. At least twice a year for conferences. I love the city, though I rarely get to see much beyond the conference center and my hotel. The best restaurant in the city is just 3 blocks from the convention center, Robert said. Fleming's. I always go there when I'm in town. Dr. Lawson nodded. I've heard it's excellent. As the plane descended through the clouds, Robert made a decision. Dr. Lawson, I know you missed your dinner tonight because of the delay. Would you consider joining me for dinner at Fleming's? My treat, of course. It's the least I can do. For a moment, Robert was sure Dr. Lawson would decline. Why would he want to spend more time with someone who had treated him so disrespectfully? But Dr. Lawson surprised him. I'd like that, Robert. Thank you. But I insist on paying for my own meal. Of course, Robert agreed quickly. I understand you're probably tired after everything today. Actually, Dr. Lawson said, I could use a good meal and conversation to help me relax before tomorrow's presentation. As the plane touched down on the runway, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the nervous anticipation of making a new friend, and perhaps the beginning of becoming a better person. Fleming's restaurant glowed with warm lighting and quiet conversation. Robert and Dr. Lawson sat at a corner table, their meal nearly finished. A bottle of mineral water stood between them. Dr. Lawson had politely declined wine, explaining he never drank before presentations. So that's how I ended up at Memorial, Dr. Lawson was saying. I had other offers, but their research program was exactly what I was looking for. Robert nodded, genuinely fascinated by the doctor's journey. Over dinner, he'd learned that Dr. Lawson had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Chicago, earned a scholarship to college at 16, and worked his way through medical school. Nothing had been handed to him. And tomorrow's presentation? Robert asked. Is it about the surgical technique everyone was talking about on the plane? Dr. Lawson smiled modestly. Yes, we've been developing it for 3 years. It reduces operating time for certain brain tumors by almost 40%, which means less time under anesthesia for patients. That's incredible, Robert said, meaning it. You must be very proud. I'm proud of the team, Dr. Lawson corrected. No one does this kind of work alone. A waiter approached to clear their plates. Can I interest you gentlemen in dessert? The chocolate soufflé is our specialty. Dr. Lawson checked his watch. I should probably get back to my hotel soon. Big day tomorrow. Of course, Robert said, trying to hide his disappointment. The evening had been more enjoyable than he'd expected. He signaled for the check. When it arrived, Dr. Lawson reached for his wallet, but Robert raised a hand. Please allow me. I insist. After a moment's hesitation, Dr. Lawson nodded. Thank you. As they waited for the credit card to be processed, a slightly uncomfortable silence fell between them. Robert felt he needed to say something more meaningful than just goodbye. Dr. Lawson, he began. Michael, the doctor corrected. You can call me Michael. Michael, Robert repeated. I want to thank you for giving me a second chance tonight. Most people wouldn't have been so forgiving. Michael looked thoughtful. In my line of work, I see people at their worst moments all the time. Fear, pain, stress, they can make anyone behave in ways they normally wouldn't. That's generous of you, but I don't have that excuse, Robert admitted. What I did, the assumptions I made, they weren't because I was stressed or afraid. Michael met his gaze directly. Then why did you do it? The simple question caught Robert off guard. He looked down at the tablecloth, then back up at Michael. Habit, I suppose. The world I live in, banking, investments, it's not very diverse. And I've been surrounded by people who look and think like me for so long that I stopped questioning my assumptions. He paused. That's not an excuse, just the truth. Michael nodded slowly. Recognizing it is the first step. Today was eye-opening for me, Robert continued. Not just realizing I was wrong about you, but seeing how easily I could be wrong about anyone. How much I might have missed over the years because of snap judgments. We all judge, Michael said. It's human nature. The question is whether we're willing to revise those judgments when presented with new information. The waiter returned with Robert's card and receipt. As they stood to leave, Robert had an idea. Your presentation tomorrow, what time is it? 10 in the morning at the convention center, the Redwood Ballroom. Robert hesitated. Would it be inappropriate if I attended? I know I'm not a medical professional, but after everything you've told me about your work, I'm genuinely interested. Surprise flashed across Michael's face, followed by a warm smile. Not at all. It's open to the public. I'd be honored if you came. Outside the restaurant, they shook hands. Thank you again for dinner, Robert." "Thank you for one of the most enlightening days of my life," Robert replied. As they parted ways on the San Francisco street, Robert felt lighter somehow. Tomorrow, he would reschedule his meetings and go listen to Dr. Michael Lawson talk about brain surgery, something he would never have imagined doing yesterday. And maybe afterward, they might have lunch. Robert smiled to himself as he hailed a taxi. Sometimes the most important journeys weren't the ones you took on planes, but the ones that changed how you saw the world and yourself.